Hello, I'm Sherry Hammers, and I wanted to thank you for coming to view the next edition of the Psalm 46 series that we've been discussing. So far, we've covered the first 8 verses. It has 11 verses altogether, and I will be referring a little bit to the history, but to get it in the detail of what we've been building on, please go and watch the other videos because there's a lot of ground to cover. And I don't want to take time with that right now. But we're going to start with verse 9. And it says, Psalm 46, verse 9, He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow. He cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in the fire. In the previous verse, verse 8, it said, Come behold the works of the Lord. And, it says, the desolations he hath made in the earth. He makes wars to cease unto the ends of the earth, bringing us right into verse 9. And let me make sure I've got that. Oh, what desolation? Okay, it is pretty short, verse 8. What desolations he hath made in the earth. And then verse 9 goes right into, He maketh wars to cease unto the ends of the earth. And we're going to go into this. I'm not sure I'll be able to do this all in one video today, but the thing is that it's getting across here is that God makes wars to cease to the ends of the earth. Hezekiah, just to bring you up to speed, Hezekiah is the king of Israel at the time that, or of Judah, that Jerusalem is completely surrounded by the armies of Sennacherib, the Assyrian king. And Hezekiah, throughout this psalm, you can see how he is really reminding himself of who God is and what God will do for them in this situation as they are putting their faith and trust in God. So he's saying God makes wars to cease unto the end of the earth. And he's in the middle of a war. They're under siege. They are threatened with starvation and then certain death. And he's saying, he's reminding himself, God makes wars to cease unto the end of the earth. And then he says, God breaks the bow, he cutteth the spear in sunder, and he burneth the chariot in the fire. And I really want to go into how this applies not only to our current world situation, our political situation in this country, but how it can apply to just the everyday trials and temptations that you go through in your life. And how is this psalm, how is this verse in particular going to bolster your faith and help you to walk through this trial that you're in with your faith and trust planted firmly on the solid rock of who God is? All right, so having said all of that, I want to tell you what one of the commentaries brought up. The pulpit commentary, he says, He maketh wars to cease unto the end of the earth. Each great deliverance effected by God is followed naturally by a term of peace. And he gives scriptures in Judges. And the land had rest 20, 40, 80 years. Each such term being typical of the final peace when God shall have put down all enemies under Messiah's feet. So the scripture is looking toward that day when Jesus, the Messiah, will reign over the entire earth. We are not in that time right now. That prophecy has not been fulfilled. He also goes on to say, God breaketh the bow, cutteth the spear in sunder. And he's saying, such as he destroys all offensive weapons, so that none may hurt or destroy in all his holy mountain. That's from Isaiah 11:9. He burneth the chariot in the fire. And I thought this was interesting. It really helps us to see what exactly Hezekiah was facing. It says the war chariots were largely employed by the Assyrians and formed the main strength of the army of Sennacherib. And we're going to get into that. That's out of 2 Kings 19 through 23. We're going to get into that scripture a little bit later. So if you read through the Old Testament, one of the greatest fears that Israel had, even when they were going in to conquer the Promised Land, was if they had an enemy that had chariots, that was just like it was like a nuclear bomb. I mean, they were like, we don't have anything that can even measure up, even come close. Like iron chariots was just one of the most discouraging aspects of the opponent's army that you could come up with. And like I said, we will refer back to that when we get into that scripture in 2 Kings. But I wanted to also go into, before we do that, I want to go back to our verse again where it talks about he breaketh the bow, he cutteth the spear, and he burneth the chariot in the fire. I wanted to look at those words in the original Hebrew and just see what we're talking about that God is doing to the weapons of the enemy. With the word break, or breaketh, means to break in pieces. So if you think about, if you've ever shot a bow and arrow, I have, but not the real arrows that can actually hurt someone. I mean, I've done the archery type thing, but you know, if you've ever shot an arrow with a bow, if your bow has a crack, or I mean, if it was broken in one place, that would be the end of your archery for the day. But God's saying, no, I don't stop it. I break the thing in pieces. Like, this thing is beyond repair. There's never going to be another arrow shot from this bow. And God is one who does things completely. He doesn't do anything halfway to leave anybody in doubt. When he destroys your enemy, and we got to remember, we war not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, the rulers of the darkness of this world, and spiritual wickedness in heavenly places. So God does things completely. And the next word is cutteth. The word cutteth, and we're talking about the spear. He cutteth the spear in sunder. And that literally means in the Hebrew to chop off. So if you chop off the spear, it's not a spear anymore. It's just a stick or a pole at the very least. And then the word they highlighted in this scripture, another word that I wanted to look at was chariot, because you know, we know what burning is, but I wanted to see what it said that chariot literally, because we all have our ideas when we hear words in the English language, but I want to see what the Hebrew thought was. And that is something revolving, a wheeled vehicle. So I think we're right on track there with the chariot. And now I want to take us into 2 Kings 19 through 23. And that says, and it's talking about this very event with Sennacherib surrounding and laying siege to Jerusalem. By thy messengers thou hast reproached the Lord, and hast said, with the multitude of my chariots I am come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and will cut down the tall cedar trees thereof, and the choice fir trees thereof, and I will enter into the lodgings of his borders, and into the forest of his Carmel. Well, that's a lot, and basically we're talking about this is what Sennacherib has said against the Lord. And this is what he boasted that he would do. He said, I'm going to come with my multitude of chariots. I'm going to come up to the height of the mountains, to the sides of Lebanon, and cut down the tall cedars and the choice fir trees. And I will enter into the lodgings of his borders, and into the forest of his Carmel. So Sennacherib is saying, this is what I'm going to do. He was pretty puffed up and high and mighty in what his idea was, his goal for what he was going to do against God and his people. But I wanted to break that down also. I looked in the commentary because I wanted to see, there's a lot of symbolic, when he talks about, he wasn't just going to cut down trees. I want to see what he was actually saying metaphorically. And in that verse, it says, in Ellicott's commentary, the multitude literally says, with the chariotry of my chariotry. So he's saying, I'm coming with my multitude of chariots. So we've got that pretty well. And then he says, I am come up to the mountains. And what it says, that he says, I've ascended lofty mountains. Such boasts were common in Assyrian inscriptions, so they have a history of boasting. And remember, the boasting when your opponent is they're basically, I guess in today's vernacular, you would say they're talking trash. They're trying to demoralize their opponent. So he's saying, I'm coming up. I've got my multitude of chariots, and I'm coming to even the loftiest mountains. And can you imagine like what he's saying? He's saying, I'm driving my chariots up a mountain. And that seems like a pretty difficult task, but he's saying, I'm going to do hard things, and I'm going to do them easily. So then he says, to the sides of Lebanon. And this means like the strongholds. It's talking about the spurs of Lebanon, like in mountain language. Basically, the strongholds of Judea, which Sennacherib had already captured. So he's already this isn't just a brand new assault against Israel or Judah. He has already captured some of their outlying cities at the borders. And so it says Lebanon as the northern bulwark of the land of Israel is used as a representative or symbol for the whole country. Then he says, and I will cut down, or I will fell the tallest cedars thereof, the choicest firs thereof. Cedars and firs, in Isaiah's language, they symbolize the kings, the princes, and the nobles, and all that is highest and most stately. So he's saying, I'm coming after the leaders. You take down the leaders, like Jesus said, when you strike the shepherd, the sheep will scatter. So when you take out the leaders, you've just got these people with no leadership, and then they're easy pickings. Then it says, the lodgings of his borders, on the furthest lodging thereof, such as Mount Zion or Jerusalem. Isaiah has height for lodging. So he's saying, I'm coming after the borders. I'm going to come up to what I've already captured, and then I'm moving in from there. And then Carmel, it says that was the pleasure garden or park. The royal palace and grounds appear to be met. So he's talking about, I'm coming after everybody, and I'm coming after the highest leadership first. So, and then we go back to the pulpit commentary. And he talks about how with the multitude of my chariots, that can mean with chariots upon chariots, the chariot force was the main arm of the Assyrian military service. So they depended on their chariots to just knock out these cities, to just take down nations. And it says that on which most dependence was placed and to which victory was commonly attributed. The number of chariots that could be brought into the field by the Assyrians is nowhere stated, but we find nearly 4,000 hostile chariots collected to oppose an ordinary Assyrian invasion and defeated. So 4,000 hostile chariots were collected by an opposing force, and the Assyrian invasion. In another assault on another nation, the opposing nation brought 4,000 chariots, and the Assyrians wiped them out easily. So you can see how Hezekiah and the rest of Jerusalem, I'm sure, were very unnerved by this news. Or it probably wasn't news to them. It was common knowledge, but now they are surrounded by at least 4,000 chariots, probably more. So I just wanted to lay a background of what we're talking about as far as weaponry, because God says he's going to stop the war to the end of the earth. He's saying, watch what I do. Watch what I can do. Look what I'm capable of. It escapes me where this is at, but it says that is the arm of the Lord. Does the arm of the Lord wax short? And God's been reminding me personally about that. When it seems like either in the news, which I don't watch, I get my news not from the mainstream because it gets too discouraging and really don't know what to believe. But I'm saying when I come across what's happening in current events, and if you focus too much on that without getting God involved, where's God at in all of this? You can get discouraged pretty quickly. But when we look at what God says and who He is, and we get our focus on, God, if God be for us, who can be against us? And he that's in me is greater than he that's in the world. When we start focusing on who He is instead of who we are, that changes our perspective. And I'll just leave you with this because I am out of time. I'll have to continue our study on verse 9 next time. But I wanted to just leave you with this, that, when the Israelites, when Joshua was leading them into Canaan, and first of all, he sent out the spies. I'm sorry, Moses sent out the spies, and Joshua was one of the spies. Joshua and Caleb came back, and the other 10 spies from the other 10 tribes came back. And Moses said, how did it go? What did you find out? And Joshua and Caleb were like, oh, we're more than able to go in and take this. With God going before us, yeah, the land is everything he said it was, and the enemies will be easily taken out. I remember exactly what they said. But I do remember the dissenters, the ones that were like, no, we can't do this. They were discouraging the people because they said, there's giants in the land, and we are as grasshoppers in their sight. And Moses told them to stop because they were discouraging the people. And it brought the mood of the multitude down to the point that they said they were going to stone Moses for even thinking about going in. And, Moses was obeying God, but they were getting upset with him. And, Joshua and Caleb, they saw the same land. They were with these other 10. They saw the same challenges. And they said, with God, it's ours. God's going to give this into our hands. And I just want to leave that with you today. If there are giants in your life right now, how do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a mere grasshopper? Or do you see God going before you and him saying, I make all the wars to stop. I break the bow. I cut off the spear and I burn the chariot. That's the leadership I want to follow. That's the one who's all powerful and that can bring us through any circumstance as we follow him and obey him. That's the God I want to follow, not my fear. Anyway, I hope you've been blessed by our little study today, and please tune in to see the rest of verse 9, and then we'll be closing out this whole psalm in just a few short videos. Thank you again for watching, and God bless.